Amara lived in a small village where the air was warm and the roads were dusty. Every morning she sat by the roadside with her basket of fruits, mangoes, bananas, oranges and guavas, waiting for people to pass by. Life was not easy, but she never complained. Her mother had passed away when she was little, and her father, a farmer, did all he could to raise her. They didn't have much, but they had love, and that was enough for Amara to stay happy. Each morning before the sun rose too high, she would arrange her fruits neatly on a small wooden table by the road. Children passing by would wave and she would always smile back. But there was one moment she looked forward to more than anything else: the time when the royal convoy passed through the village road. Everyone in the village knew the sound of the convoy, the strong steps of the horses, the glimmer of golden carriages, and the royal flags flying in the wind. The people would stop whatever they were doing to watch. Some bowed, some cheered quietly, but Amara always did one thing: she waved. She waved every single day, no matter how tired she was or how hot the day felt. Her heart always beat faster when the prince's carriage passed by. She didn't really know why she waved. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was her way of dreaming even when she had nothing. The prince, Prince Kalechi, was young and handsome. People said he was kind and wise, though many in the village had never seen him up close. He was always surrounded by guards in gold, dressed in royal clothes, his face calm and unreadable. Amara always hoped he would look her way just once. But he never did. Still she kept waving. Sometimes her friends teased her. "Amara, why do you wave at someone who doesn't even know you exist?" They would laugh. But she only smiled and said, "Because it costs nothing to be kind." She didn't expect anything in return. To her, waving at the prince was a small joy in her simple life. It made her feel seen, even if only by herself. Her father would often watch from afar, shaking his head with a smile. "My daughter, your heart is too big," he would say. "You find light in the smallest places." One afternoon, while arranging her fruits, she saw the convoy approaching in the distance. The dust rose as the horses galloped closer, and her heart leapt with excitement. She wiped her hands quickly, stood tall, and waved with all the happiness in her heart. The villagers around her stepped back respectfully, but Amara stood at the very front, her smile shining in the sunlight. As the golden carriage passed, she thought, for just a second, that she saw the prince turn his head slightly. Her breath caught. Did he see her? Or was it her imagination again? She couldn't tell. But it didn't matter. That small moment made her day brighter. When the convoy disappeared down the road, Amara went back to selling her fruits. But her heart still fluttered with quiet hope. She didn't know why she cared so much. Maybe it wasn't really about the prince. Maybe it was about believing that even a poor village girl like her could be noticed, that her life could mean something more than dusty roads and fruit baskets. That evening she sat by the river, washing the remaining fruits and watching the sun set behind the hills. The water shimmered like gold and she smiled softly to herself. "Maybe one day he'll see me," she whispered, her voice carried away by the gentle wind. Every day after that, Amara repeated the same routine. She worked hard, smiled at everyone, and waited for the royal convoy. Sometimes the prince's carriage came early, sometimes it didn't come at all. But she never gave up. Even on days when it rained and her clothes got soaked, she stood by the road with her small umbrella, waving as the horses splashed through the puddles. The other villagers began to notice her dedication. Some admired her spirit while others shook their heads. "She's wasting her time," they said. "Princes don't stop for girls like her." But Amara didn't listen. She didn't need anyone to understand her heart. Every wave was a symbol of hope, a promise she made to herself to never stop believing that something good could happen. Unknown to her, fate was already moving quietly behind the scenes. The prince had started to notice her, the same girl with bright eyes who waved every morning, never missing a day. He saw her kindness, her joy, and her courage. Though she didn't know it yet, her simple act of waving was about to change her life forever. That night, as Amara lay on her small mat beside her father, the stars glimmered through the roof cracks. She whispered a prayer, thanking God for another day and for the strength to keep smiling. She had no riches, no fancy clothes, but her heart was pure and her dreams were alive. And somewhere beyond the hills, in the royal palace lit with candles and gold, Prince Kalechi sat by his window, thinking about the girl by the road, the one who smiled as if she carried sunshine in her soul. Neither of them knew it yet, but their worlds were slowly drawing closer, connected by one simple act of kindness: a wave. Every morning, the royal convoy rode through the dusty roads leading to the city. The villagers always stepped aside, bowing or waving respectfully. But one girl, one smiling bright-eyed fruit seller, had begun to stand out to Prince Kelechi. Her name, though he did not know it yet, was Amara. She stood by the same spot every day, her fruit basket beside her, her hand raised high, waving as if she were greeting an old friend. At first, the prince barely noticed her. He was used to people waving, bowing, and showing respect as he passed. It was part of his daily routine. But one morning, as the sun painted the sky orange and gold, he glanced out of his carriage window and saw her clearly. The girl's clothes were simple and worn, yet her smile, that wide, sincere smile, was brighter than the morning light itself. She wasn't waving like the others did, out of duty or fear. There was something pure in her gesture. Something that made him pause. That evening, as he sat in his study reading reports, the image of the girl came back to him. Her small hands waving through the dust, her eyes filled with warmth. He shook his head, trying to brush the thought away. "Why am I thinking about a stranger?" he murmured. But her face lingered in his mind like a soft melody. The next morning, when the convoy prepared to leave the palace, the prince gave an unexpected order. "Slow the horses when we reach the village road," he said calmly. The guards exchanged puzzled glances but obeyed. As they approached the village, the people stepped aside as usual. Children waved, elders bowed, and shopkeepers paused their work. But there she was again, Amara, standing by her fruit stand, waving with that same smile. The convoy slowed as instructed. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Amara's heart skipped. The prince, the same man she had waved to for months, was looking right at her. She froze for a second, her hand mid-air. But then she smiled wider, her joy pure and unshaken. The prince didn't wave back, but he did something no one expected. He smiled. Just a small, quiet smile, but for Amara, it meant everything. As the convoy rode off, the guards whispered among themselves. "Did the prince just smile?" one said. "At a fruit seller?" another replied, surprised. Back at the palace, Prince Kelechi tried to focus on his royal duties. Ministers spoke to him about trade, taxes, and politics. But his mind drifted to that small roadside stand and the girl who waved as if she believed the world could still be kind. "Who is that girl by the roadside?" he asked his chief guard later that day. The guard bowed and replied, "Just a village fruit seller, Your Highness. She waves every morning when we pass." "Every morning?" Kelechi repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, my prince. She never misses a day." The prince leaned back, intrigued. "Strange," he murmured. "Most people only wave when they hope to gain something. But she waves, as though she already has everything she needs." That night he walked out onto the palace balcony. The moonlight washed over the courtyard as he stood silently, thinking about that girl's smile. It wasn't about beauty, he realized. It was something deeper, a sense of peace, of quiet strength that he couldn't ignore. The next morning he ordered his driver again, "Slow the convoy when we pass the village." And again he saw her. Her hands arranging mangoes and guavas neatly, her scarf tied neatly around her head, her laughter floating through the air as she greeted children who came to buy fruit. She didn't seem to notice him watching, and yet, when she waved, it felt as though her smile was meant just for him. Days passed. Then weeks. The prince found himself anticipating that brief moment of seeing her. The palace servants began to notice his small changes. He smiled more often, and he seemed lighter, less burdened by his royal responsibilities. He didn't understand why a simple girl had caught his attention. He had met many people, nobles, scholars, princesses, but none of them had that same honest warmth. She didn't know he was watching her, yet she carried herself with quiet pride and dignity. One afternoon, while riding back from a royal meeting, he saw her helping an elderly man carry a heavy sack. Her fruits were left unattended, yet she didn't hesitate. She was laughing as she helped, her joy untouched by struggle. The prince turned to his advisor and said, "There is something rare about that girl. She reminds me of the goodness we forget exists." The advisor bowed. "Would you like me to find out more about her, Your Highness?" Prince Kelechi hesitated for a long moment before replying softly, "Not yet. I want to understand her before I approach her. Some truths are clearer when seen, not spoken." That night he couldn't sleep. He walked through the palace gardens, the cool breeze rustling the trees. For the first time in years he felt curious, not about politics or wealth, but about a person. He wondered what her dreams were. Did she even know who he was? Or did she wave simply out of kindness without expecting anything in return? In a world where people bowed for favors and smiled for wealth, her pure gesture felt like a rare light. Meanwhile, in her small hut at the edge of the village, Amara told her father excitedly, "Papa, the prince looked at me today." Her father laughed, shaking his head. "My daughter, princes do not notice girls like us." But Amara only smiled, her heart glowing with quiet hope. "Maybe this one does," she said softly. From that day on, every time the royal convoy passed, it slowed, just a little. And every time the prince's eyes searched for her. It became a silent routine, two souls from different worlds, connected by glances and unspoken curiosity. Neither of them spoke, but something had begun to grow, something small, fragile, and yet deeply real. And though Amara didn't know it yet, her simple act of waving had already changed how the prince saw the world, and how he would see her forever. The morning sun rose softly over the hills, spreading golden light across the small village. The air smelled of dust and fresh fruit as Amara arranged her basket by the roadside, just like every other day. Her hands moved quickly, wiping each mango and orange until they shone. The children passing by greeted her with cheerful voices and she waved back, her heart light. For months, this had been her quiet joy, standing by the road, waving at the royal convoy as it passed by. She never expected anything in return. It was just a small moment of happiness in her simple life. That morning she stood as she always did, her bright scarf fluttering in the breeze, her smile steady and warm. But something was different in the air. The birds seemed to sing louder, and the sound of the horses' hooves echoed stronger. When the royal convoy appeared in the distance, the sun glinted off the prince's golden carriage, and Amara raised her hand eagerly ready to wave. But instead of passing by, the convoy began to slow. Dust rose gently as the horses came to a halt right in front of her stall. The villagers froze in disbelief. No one could remember the last time the prince's convoy had stopped in their little village. The guards looked around, unsure of what was happening. Then, to everyone's shock, the golden door of the carriage opened. Prince Kalechi stepped down. His royal robe shimmered under the sunlight, and his presence filled the quiet road. The crowd gasped and began to whisper, bowing low to the ground. But Amara couldn't move. Her basket of fruit trembled in her hands as her heart beat faster than ever. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The prince, the same one she had waved to every morning, was walking toward her. The prince stopped a few steps away, his eyes calm and curious. "You wave every day," he said gently, his voice warm and kind. "Why do you do it?" Amara swallowed hard. Her hands were shaking, but she lifted her head slowly to meet his eyes. "Because it makes me happy," she said softly. "When I see the convoy, I feel like hope is passing by. I wave because maybe kindness will notice me one day." Her words hung in the air, pure and honest. The prince's heart stirred. He had expected a simple answer, maybe flattery or fear, but instead her reply was filled with innocence and truth. He looked at her closely, at the small beads of sweat on her forehead, the dust on her hands, and yet, the light in her eyes that shone brighter than any jewel in his palace. "What is your name?" he asked. "Amara," she replied shyly, her voice trembling a little. "Amara," the prince repeated as if tasting the sound of it. "It suits you. It means grace, doesn't it?" She nodded quickly, unsure if she should speak more. The villagers watched in awe, whispering and pointing. No one dared move. Prince Kalechi smiled softly. "How much for your fruits?" She blinked, surprised. "They are not expensive, my prince," she said, bowing slightly. He turned to his guard and said, "Buy them all." The guard stepped forward, handed her a bag of gold coins far beyond the value of her fruits, and began loading the carriage with the baskets. Amara stared at the gold in disbelief. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. "But, Your Highness," she said quickly, "this is too much. I can't take it." The prince shook his head. "You can. And you will. This is not just for the fruits, it's for your heart." Amara looked down, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you, my prince," she whispered. Prince Kalechi looked around at the small, dusty village. Children peeked from behind their mothers, wide-eyed and amazed. The air was still, as though the whole world had stopped to witness this moment. He turned back to Amara. "You remind me of something I had forgotten," he said quietly. "Simple joy. The kind that asks for nothing in return." They talked for a while, not like a prince and a peasant, but like two people who had found understanding in the most unexpected place. He asked about her life, her family, her dreams. She spoke with honesty, never trying to impress him. She told him how she helped her father, how she loved the sound of birds in the morning, and how she wished to one day open a small shop of her own. The prince listened, his eyes soft. For the first time in years, he felt free from the weight of the crown, the endless duties, and the empty flattery that filled his palace halls. Finally, the royal advisor stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Your Highness, we must continue," he said respectfully. Prince Kalechi nodded, but his gaze remained on Amara. "Until we meet again," he said, his voice low and sincere. Amara could only nod. Her lips parted to speak, but no words came out. She just watched as he stepped back into his golden carriage. The convoy began to move once more, slowly at first, then faster, until the sound of hooves faded into the distance. The villagers crowded around Amara, their eyes wide with wonder. "Amara," one of the women cried. "The prince spoke to you." Another said, "He bought all your fruits. The gods must be smiling upon you." Amara smiled faintly, still holding the bag of gold. Her heart was beating wildly, but not because of the gold or the attention. It was because for the first time she felt truly seen. As the dust settled on the empty road, she looked down the path where the convoy had disappeared. The same path she had waved to for months. And in that quiet moment she knew, something had changed. Not just for her but for him too. That night, in the royal palace, Prince Kalechi sat by his window, thinking of the girl with the smile that could light up a village. He couldn't explain it, but he felt different. Her words echoed in his mind, "Maybe kindness will notice me one day." He smiled to himself. "Kindness did notice you, Amara," he whispered softly. And somewhere in the small village, under the same moonlight, Amara whispered to the stars, "Thank you for noticing me." Neither of them knew what the future held. But both felt the same quiet warmth in their hearts, the kind that told them their paths would cross again. A few days had passed since the prince's convoy stopped in the small village. Life had slowly returned to normal, but for Amara nothing felt the same. Every morning, she still went to her spot by the road, arranging her fruits neatly in a basket, yet her mind often drifted to the memory of that day, the prince's voice, his gentle smile, and the kindness in his eyes. Sometimes the villagers teased her lightly. "Amara, are you waiting for your prince again?" they would say, laughing. She would blush and shake her head, pretending not to care. But deep inside her heart hoped. Maybe, just maybe, she would see him again. Then one warm afternoon something unusual happened. A trumpet sounded in the distance, followed by the rhythmic steps of royal horses. Everyone in the village ran to the road to see what was happening. A royal messenger, dressed in a blue robe with the king's crest on his chest, stopped his horse in front of Amara's fruit stall. He looked around and asked, "Who among you is called Amara?" The villagers gasped, their eyes turning toward her. Amara stepped forward slowly, her voice trembling. "I am Amara, sir." The messenger smiled and handed her a golden scroll tied with a red ribbon. "This is from His Royal Highness Prince Kalechi," he announced. Amara's hands shook as she untied the ribbon and opened the letter. The paper smelled faintly of jasmine and gold ink filled the words. "Dear Amara, you reminded me that true happiness lives in the hearts of the simple and kind. I invite you to the royal palace for the Festival of Lights. Your presence will honor us. Prince Kalechi." The villagers murmured in disbelief. Some cheered, others whispered with surprise. A few looked at her with envy, but most were proud. Never before had someone from their humble village been invited to the royal palace. Amara's heart pounded. She could hardly believe what she had read. The prince had remembered her. He wanted to see her again. That night she could hardly sleep. She sat by the small window of her hut, staring at the stars. "What if they laugh at me?" she whispered to herself. "I'm just a poor girl who sells fruit." Her old neighbor Mama Kemi smiled and said gently, "Child, the prince saw something in you that gold cannot buy. Go with courage. Be yourself." The next morning Amara woke before dawn. She washed her face with cool water, brushed her hair, and put on her best dress, a simple cream-colored gown that she had sewn herself. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and neat. She wrapped her scarf neatly around her head and took a deep breath. When the royal carriage arrived to take her to the palace, the whole village gathered to watch. The children waved, cheering for her. Some women wiped their eyes proudly. Amara smiled and waved back as the carriage began to move. Her heart fluttered with both fear and excitement. The journey to the capital was long but beautiful. The road curved through green hills and golden fields. Amara pressed her face gently against the window, watching everything with wonder. When the carriage finally entered the royal gates, her breath caught in her throat. The palace was grand, walls of white marble, gardens full of colorful flowers, and fountains that sparkled under the sun. Servants moved gracefully, carrying trays of food and flowers. Everywhere she looked, she saw beauty and elegance unlike anything she had ever imagined. The guards bowed as they opened the tall golden doors. Amara stepped inside the great hall, her footsteps echoing softly on the polished floor. At the far end of the hall stood Prince Kalechi, dressed in a fine royal robe of deep blue and gold. When he saw her, his face lit up with a genuine smile. "Amara," he said warmly, walking toward her. "You came." Amara bowed slightly. "Yes, Your Highness. Thank you for inviting me." He shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. I should thank you for reminding me that joy can be found in simple things." She blushed, unsure how to reply. The prince gestured for her to walk with him through the palace gardens. The festival had already begun. Musicians played soft drums and flutes, dancers moved gracefully, and children ran around with small paper lanterns. Amara watched in awe as the palace lit up with golden light. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the sweet scent of roasted corn and flowers. Prince Kalechi turned to her and said, "Tell me, Amara, do you like the festival?" She smiled shyly. "It's beautiful, Your Highness. But I think the most beautiful thing here is the kindness that fills the air." He looked at her, touched by her words. "You see beauty where others see nothing special," he said softly. "That's what makes you different." They walked through the garden, talking like old friends. Amara told him stories about her village, how she helped her neighbors, how she loved to sing while selling fruits, and how she dreamed of one day opening a small fruit stall in the city. The prince listened carefully, fascinated by her honesty. "Most people I meet speak to impress me," he said, smiling. "But you speak from the heart." Amara laughed softly. "I only know how to be myself, Your Highness." The evening grew brighter as the festival reached its peak. The lights reflected on the fountains and the sound of laughter filled the air. The prince watched Amara's face glow under the lanterns, her smile gentle, her eyes full of wonder. In that moment he realized something. He admired her not just for her kindness but for her courage, humility, and the quiet strength that shone in her every word. As the night ended, the prince led her to the balcony that overlooked the city. The stars twinkled above them and the palace bells rang softly. "Amara," he said quietly, "you've shown me what true beauty is, not in gold or crowns but in a pure heart." Amara turned to him, her eyes glistening with emotion. "You've shown me that even those in high places can have kind hearts too." They stood together in silence for a moment, the gentle wind brushing past them. Below, the festival lights flickered like stars on earth. Before she left, the prince said, "This will not be our last meeting." Amara smiled softly. "I will remember this day forever, Your Highness." As the carriage took her home under the moonlit sky, Amara looked out the window, her heart warm and full. She had come from a small dusty village, yet she had been welcomed into the royal palace. She didn't know what destiny awaited her, but she knew one thing for certain: kindness had changed her life forever. And back at the palace, Prince Kalechi stood by the balcony, watching the carriage disappear into the night. His heart felt lighter than it had in years. "She reminded me of what truly matters," he whispered to himself. The days following the festival were quiet but full of whispers across the kingdom. Everywhere people talked about the mysterious village girl who had attended the royal celebration. Some said she was a guest of honor. Others claimed she had captured the prince's heart. In her small village, Amara returned to her simple life, selling fruits by the roadside as she always had. Yet something in her had changed. Her eyes held more confidence, her smile more peace. Whenever she passed the tree near her stall, she remembered the prince's words, "True happiness lives in simple hearts." Still, she thought their worlds were too far apart. She believed that the meeting at the palace was only a beautiful memory, a kind act that would stay with her forever. But miles away in the Golden Palace, Prince Kalechi could not forget her. Her words echoed in his mind every day. He met countless noble women dressed in jewels and silk, but none spoke with the same sincerity as Amara. She had reminded him of something pure, the kind of honesty that no wealth could buy. One morning, while sitting with his father, King Obinna, the prince finally spoke his heart. "Father," he said, "I have found the one I wish to marry." The king smiled with curiosity. "Who is she, my son? A princess from a nearby kingdom?" The prince shook his head. "No, father. She is a humble girl from a village. Her name is Amara." The court went silent. The king raised an eyebrow, surprised but not angry. "A village girl?" he repeated slowly. "You know the people will talk. They expect you to marry a royal." "I know," the prince said firmly. "But she has a heart richer than gold. She reminded me that leadership means love, not power. If I am to rule someday, I want someone beside me who will keep me grounded in kindness." The king looked at his son for a long moment. Then a gentle smile appeared on his face. "If your heart is certain, Then I will not stand in your way, he said. A pure heart is rarer than any crown. The next few weeks were filled with secret preparations. Royal messengers rode across the land, and the palace staff whispered about a special announcement. Yet no one knew what it was. Meanwhile, Amara continued her daily routine, unaware of what was about to happen. One quiet afternoon, as she arranged her fruits, she heard the sound of drums echoing through the village. People rushed to the road to see what was happening. A royal convoy approached, bright banners fluttering, horses gleaming, and golden carriages shining under the sun. Amara's heart skipped a beat. It was the same sight she had seen for years, but this time, something was different. The carriage stopped directly in front of her stall. The door opened and out stepped Prince Kelechi. The villagers gasped in shock. Some bowed, others froze in awe. Amara could hardly believe her eyes. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and stood trembling. "Your Highness," she whispered. Why are you here?" The prince smiled warmly. "Amara," he said, "you once waved at me every day. Now I have come to wave back." A soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Then the prince continued, his voice calm but strong. "You showed me that true worth does not come from wealth or birth, but from kindness and courage. I have made my choice, and my heart has chosen you." The crowd gasped again. Amara's eyes widened in disbelief. "Me? Your Highness? I am just a fruit seller," she stammered. The prince gently took her hand. "You are much more than that. You are proof that even the simplest soul can carry a royal heart." Tears filled Amara's eyes. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh. The prince smiled reassuringly. "Come with me," he said softly. "It's time the world sees the beauty of your heart." That same evening, the royal palace shone brighter than ever before. Drums beat, horns sounded, and the people gathered outside the grand gates, curious about the prince's big announcement. When the golden doors opened, the crowd fell silent. Prince Kelechi stepped out, wearing a white royal robe embroidered with gold. Beside him stood Amara, dressed in a simple but elegant royal gown, her hair beautifully adorned with tiny pearls. For a moment the people were speechless. Then a wave of cheers rose through the air. The prince raised his hand to calm the crowd. "My people," he began, his voice echoing through the courtyard, "today I stand before you not just as your prince, but as a man who has found truth in humility. The woman beside me is not from a royal family, but she has the noblest heart I have ever known." He turned to Amara and smiled. "She taught me that true royalty comes from the heart." Tears streamed down Amara's cheeks as she looked at him, the same man she once waved at from afar. Now he stood beside her, holding her hand before the entire kingdom. The crowd erupted in joy. Some shouted her name, others cried with happiness. The villagers who had once teased her watched with pride, realizing how far she had come. Amara's heart swelled with emotion. As the prince placed a delicate gold necklace around her neck, she whispered, "Thank you, for seeing me when no one else did." Prince Kelechi smiled. "You waved with hope. I only followed where that hope led me." Together they waved to the cheering crowd, their hands clasped tightly. The royal bells rang loudly across the city, marking not just a royal union, but the beginning of a new kind of story, one where love and kindness reigned above status and power. As fireworks lit up the night sky, Amara looked at the stars with tears in her eyes. She remembered the dusty roadside where it had all begun, the fruit stall, the waves, the dreams she never dared to speak aloud. Now she stood in a golden gown beside the prince, no longer a simple village girl, but a woman whose heart had changed the fate of a kingdom. And as the people continued to cheer, Amara smiled through her tears, whispering to herself, "Kindness really can change destiny." The end.